video, we're going to be looking at input function. So what is an input function? Well, an input function is a function used to capture the input of a user and can be saved in a variable. So what you could do with the input function is the user could go ahead and type up whatever he wants in the console when we want him to, and we could capture whatever he typed in that console and save it in a variable and make use of it. So that in that manner we can make a basic user interface. So at the end of this video, we'll all be able to build a user interface where we can take inputs from the user and do whatever operation we want on them and then print the output. So let's get started. So first of all, we can do some basic start off, right? When I mean basic, I mean very basic. So what we're going to do is basically print a string or a sentence where we say, "Hi, what is your name?" And that's all we're going to ask them. And what we can do is use the input function, which is this, and then we use the function syntax, which is the open bracket and close bracket, and that is the input function right there, right? And that will let the user actually type something in the console. So let's look at it. So let's run this program, and then as you can see, it says, "Hi, what is your name?" And then I could just say Myth, and then as you can see, we didn't get anything else, but I was able to actually type in the console, which is amazing. Now what I could do is, using this Python program, I could use whatever he gave me in the console, whatever the user gave me in the console, I could save it in a variable. And the way we could do that is by taking the input function and saving it in a variable itself. We haven't seen that before, have we? Actually taking a function and saving it in a variable. Now what I'm going to save it in a variable as is called name, because the user is going to send an input of his name because we are asking him for his name, and he's going to obviously type his name. So we're going to save it in a variable called name. Now what we're going to do is very simple. We're just going to print his name back to him, right? We know how to print variables. We just put in the print statement, we just put the argument as the variable without any old syntax. And then what we can do is run this, and then when we say Myth, we should get Myth back as an output. As you can see, we got Myth back. Now we can use this to make it more user friendly, right? Instead of just printing their name out, which is quite boring, we could actually make it more, exciting. So I could just go in the print function and I could put a string in the print function, as we know, and I'll just say, "Here is your name." And we know that we need to separate the string from the variable because otherwise it will give us an error. So how do we separate them? We know that we can separate arguments when we're passing it into a function or a method. We can use the comma to separate arguments. So I'm sending a variable and a string here, so I'll use a comma to separate it. And then hopefully when we run this program, we'll send our name, and then as an output we will get "Here's your name," whatever the name I put in. So when I run this, I'll just say, "What is my name?" I'll say user, and it says, "Here's your name, user." Right? Isn't that amazing? We just built a basic user interface. Now I promise you this will get more exciting than this. So how about we build a Python program, right, where we can take two numbers from the user, sum them, and then send the output back to him. How do we do that? It's very simple. Let me clear all this. So starting off, I'll just print a plain old string here saying, "Hi, can you please type your name?" Type a number in the console. Okay, very simple. And what the user is going to do is actually go into the console and try to type something in the console, right? So we have to let him, so that's where we use the input function. And he'll just give an input, and whatever the input is going to be, that is going to be the number that we've asked him to put in the console. So we'll save it in a variable called number1, because we're going to have two numbers right? And we're going to sum them. So we need to make our variable names nice and clear. All I'm going to say is number 1. And then I'll set that as a variable for the value of whatever the user sends. Now what I'm going to do is just print something else, and I'm going to say, thank you. Can you please type another number? Because we need two numbers to sum them, right? And what we're going to do is just put another input here because we need to let the user type something and we need to capture it. So we'll just put input. And then this input is going to be the second number. So I'm going to save it in the variable called number 2. Right? This is starting to make sense now, right? And now we all know this is quite easy because now we've captured the inputs. What we can do is just simply add both of those variables where the values are saved. Just add both of them, save it in a variable, and print it out, right? It's as simple as that. Let's try that. So let's just say, let's create another variable called sum of numbers. And we'll set that equal to, we know that the number 1 has the value of whatever the user sent as the first number. So we'll just say number 1 plus, because we are we're trying to find the sum of both of these numbers that the user sent. So we just put add arithmetic operation after number 1. And then after that, we put in the other number, which is number 2, right? Because we're going to add both of these numbers, so we need to just sum them, right? And this, whatever is the sum of both of those numbers, will be saved in the variable called sum of numbers. And now we just print the output, right? So we'll just say sum of numbers in the print function, and that should be done, right? Hopefully. So let's run this and see what happens. So first of all, I'm just going to put in 3 as my first number, and then it says thank you, can you okay, it says paste, but I mean please type another number, and let's just say 4. And then it says 34. Wait, what? Isn't it meant to say 7 because the sum of 3 and 4 is 7? Well, no. Remember in our operations, we learned that when we add 2 strings, it combines them into one big string. Now, you might be confused here, saying that, wait, but these are 2 integers because 3 and 4 are whole numbers and they're integers, right? Well, there's totally nothing wrong in thinking that because that's what everyone thinks. Even I thought that when I was learning the input function. But there's one rule to remember always about the input function. Whatever you put in the console, the input function will always save it as a string, right? So it'll always save it as a string. So what can we do here? It's going to save it as a string, and we know that when we add 2 strings, it's going to make it into one big string. So this is where you use a function called int. So what int does, it takes whatever argument you pass in its functions brackets, and then it turns it into an integer if possible. Now this only happens as long as whatever data type you put in is actually has a number in it or a float, right? As long as you put a number or a float that is stored as a data type of string, it will turn it into an integer. So how do we use it here? So what we can just do is type an int, and we know that for a function we need to put it as a syntax. Now instead of directly applying this to our code, let's put it somewhere else. So let's just create another Python file because I want to explain more in depth about this function. So let's just name this file as int, and what we're going to do is make another simple program. So I'm just going to say please type a number, take an input from the user, and then save that input in a variable called number. And then, now I've created a basic user interface, nothing too crazy. I'm just saying, please put in a number, and we're capturing that number, not even printing the number out. But what I'm trying to explain here is, when you print the type of this number by using the type function that we learned in data types, I'm going to show you that it's actually saved as a string. So this is how I can show you that it's actually saving as a string. So if I say 4, as you can see, it says the type of this data type of this number is a string, right? So this should make more sense to you now because you've actually seen some proof. Now, we're going to actually take this number and turn it into an int. That's why we actually created this Python file, right? So how do we turn it into an int? We can use the int function just like this that I've talked about, and what we do is pass whatever we want to turn into an int as an argument. In this case, it's number, so we'll just pass number, and that will turn it into an integer. And now we save this new number that is actually an integer inside a variable called number, which we've already used, but we're saving a string. So instead, I'm going to save an integer, and we print the type of this number that we've just turned into a integer, and we run this, and hopefully what should happen is it should print integer type once we've done it. So here, as you can see, first of all it was a string, but then once we turned it into an integer and printed the type of it, it's now an integer, right? So this is how you can use the function int. And we can go back to our code right now and change it, right? So let me just change this first. It's annoying me a little bit. Okay, right. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at where we need to actually use this function in our code. So what we can do is basically, here we said number 1 plus number 2. So instead of actually creating another variable, turning it into an int, and then saving it into that variable again, we can directly turn it into an int temporarily, just so that we can save. We can pretend that this number is actually an int using the int function, right? So then the sum of numbers will actually be an integer, so they will just sum them up, because we know when there are two integers, when you sum them up, it's actually going to add them, right? So when you just save this in the variable called sum of numbers, print sum of numbers, this time it should be correct. So let's run this. And then we put 4, and then we type 5, and then as you can see, it prints 9. So that is the sum of our numbers. As you can see, we were able to build a basic, very basic user interface, and we only wrote 6 lines of code, and we were able to take input from the user, add it, and then give it back. So that's how you can use the input function. You can build crazy stuff with this, with the knowledge that we have, but this is very basic. So in this video, we learned about the input function and another function called int.